I need to preface this by saying I love teachers. I see a couple of you out there. I'm married to a teacher. I promise I respect teachers. Frankly, in this day and age, if you don't, I don't know what's wrong with you. But sometimes I say the wrong thing. So my daughter was struggling with math in 4th grade, and I recognized that struggle. JJ and I here, we're English majors, and I recognized the struggle, that when the math became a little bit harder than it had been, she was lost. And I was talking to her 4th grade teacher, who, again, we loved. Like, I need to stress this. We loved her 4th grade teacher. And I just very matter-of-factly and truly objectively, I meant no ill will, I said, I actually think she's probably pretty good at math. It's just the way you teach it. But I'm serious. This was like an objective, like there are many ways to teach math, and the way you are teaching it maybe works for like 90% of the room, but it's not working for her. But obviously I look like an asshole. Like, trust me, I know. But the thing is, I knew there was a different way to teach math, because when I was in high school, I was at a very small school. It was incredibly intense, some might say, and it worked out really well for me. But this was the kind of school where, like, the college admission office held its breath each year until they got that Ivy League acceptance. And you're like, okay, well, that's like a good thing to aspire to. We graduated classes of 24 people. And there was an Ivy League acceptance, minimum 1, in every class every year. Like, that's the level of intensity. And I was destined to be an English major. And so as I rose through the ranks, and, you know, it was like Algebra 1, that was sort of hard. Geometry, that I sort of liked. Algebra 2, ooh, that's a little harder. And then it was pre-calculus. And again, my school didn't teach any honors classes because everything was taught at the honors level. So I am in an honors level pre-calculus class when I'm a junior in high school, and I am struggling. And junior year, pre-calculus, I get my first and only high school C. So I didn't fail. I could go on to calculus, which was like absurd. But at the end of that junior year, when I got a C in pre-calculus, I went on a service trip with some of my classmates where we went to build houses for Habitat for Humanity in Rochester, New York. And the woman who led the trip was the calculus teacher I was going to have the next year. And she was incredibly impressed when I calculated the rise of the angle of the wheelchair ramp we needed to build, because she knew I got a C in pre-calculus. And she was like, oh, that's interesting. And I'm like, yeah, geometry, shapes, I'm great with that. It's just I really struggled with pre-calculus. Okay, fine. So we come back to school for my senior year of high school, and there are, I think, 8 of us in the calculus class. It's AP calculus, right? Like, this is a college level calculus class for an English major, destined to be an English major. So there were 2 of us who sat along this wall, like this partition, and then there were 2 rows of 3 here. And like, we didn't have assigned seats, but that's just sort of, you get into a rhythm and you get into pattern. And Miss George, who had led my trip to Rochester, New York to build houses for Habitat for Humanity, including calculating the rise of a wheelchair ramp, would teach her lesson. And the 2 girls, me and the other girl who sat behind me, would be like, but she'd be like, it's okay, yeah, and she would explain whatever we were confused about. And then 5 minutes later, just one of us would be like, she'd be like, okay, right, I get it. And then there'd be the tipping point. And sometimes it was on question 3, sometimes it was on question 5, but she would turn and look to our side of the room and say, it's gonna be okay. You're gonna stay after class. We're gonna get through this. And she would continue to teach her lesson to the other 6 girls in the room who totally got it, and then they would go off to lunch, and she would sit with us and re-teach us the entire lesson every day, every other day, Any day we needed it, there was something, and I could see her eyes, right? We would be like, ooh, but, and she would look, and she'd be like, all right, let me talk you through this. And she would talk us through it, and then I would see the tipping point. I would see it in her eyes where it got to the point where she would just look and go, and we'd be like, okay. And for the rest of the period, we would just sort of like doodle in our notebooks because we knew she was going to reteach us the entire lesson. I passed AP chemistry and got college credit to the extent that I didn't have to take any math in college because this woman spent the time reteaching her entire lesson practically every day to me and one of my classmates. So when I said to my daughter's 4th grade teacher, I think Nora might be good at math, I just think it's the way you teach it, I meant no ill will. I just remembered with love, Miss George.